My SIL threw my belongings in the trash while I was in labor. She didn't realize who actually owns the house. I gripped the cold metal rails of the hospital bed as another wave of pain ripped through my body. At 60 years old, I never expected to be here, but life is full of surprises. My breath came in ragged gasps while the monitor beeped a steady, mocking rhythm. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. I reached for it with a trembling hand, thinking it was my husband, Mark. Instead, it was a notification from my home security app. I tapped the screen and my heart stopped. On the live video feed, I saw my sister-in-law, Brooke. She was tossing my life onto the wet curb. My late mother's hand-painted canvases were being thrown into the mud. My designer suits and the baby's antique wood crib followed. It was raining hard, and she was smiling. I felt a different kind of pain now, one that no medicine could dull. The video played on like a nightmare I could not escape. I watched as a massive garbage truck pulled up to my driveway. Brooke was laughing and chatting with the workers, pointing at the piles of my belongings like they were nothing but filth. My journals, filled with decades of memories, were soaking up the dirty rainwater. I tried to call Mark's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail every single time. I was alone in this sterile room, 8 centimeters dilated and completely helpless. I watched the garbage men toss my mother's art into the back of the truck to be crushed. Brooke looked directly at the camera and waved, her face twisted in a mask of triumph. I felt like I was disappearing. If you want to see how I take my life back from these vultures, subscribe now for more. The door finally pushed open and Mark walked in. I expected him to be frantic, but he looked perfectly calm. He didn't even look at the phone screen I was holding out to him. I pointed at the video of his sister destroying our home, but he just patted my hand. He told me that Brooke just needed her space and that I should focus on the birth. He said it was her house, too, in a way. I stared at him, my eyes wide with disbelief. A few hours later, the baby was born, a beautiful girl with my mother's eyes. But the joy I should have felt was hollow and cold. I looked at Mark, who was sitting in the corner, busily texting Brooke about how the house looks now that it was finally empty of my things. 2 days later, the hospital discharged me. I clutched my newborn daughter against my chest as the taxi pulled into my driveway. My heart shattered into a million pieces. The lawn was a graveyard of my history. My expensive skincare bottles were smashed against the bricks, and my journals were nothing but gray pulp in the grass. Brooke was sitting on my porch swing, sipping a glass of expensive wine. She didn't even stand up when she saw the baby. She just looked at me with cold, victorious eyes. Mark stepped out of the car and walked straight to her side. Brooke smiled and told me that the locks had been changed. She told Mark to bring the baby inside but said my Uber was already waiting to take me away. I was being exiled from my own life. As I stood on the sidewalk, a memory from 3 years ago flashed through my mind. I was a high-earning software architect back then, and I had worked so hard for every penny. When I received a large inheritance from my mother, I decided to buy this house in cash. I was careful, though. I knew about Mark's secret gambling debts and his family's greed. I placed the house in a private trust that only I controlled. I never put Mark's name on any of the legal papers. I let them believe the house was passed down from their late grandfather just to spare their pride. They thought they were the rightful heirs to a family estate. They had no idea that every brick and every shingle belonged to me, and me alone. I remembered the night I felt the safest in this house. It was a Tuesday, and a heavy storm was rattling the windows. Mark had cooked a rare dinner for me, and we sat by the fireplace. He looked me in the eyes and promised that this house would always be my sanctuary. He held me close, and for the first time in years, the physical connection felt electric and real. I believed every word he said. I thought he was my protector against the world. Now, as I stood on the wet pavement looking at him standing behind Brooke, the truth hit me like a physical blow. That intimacy was just a performance. It was a long game he played to keep a roof over his head. He didn't love me, he loved the stability my money provided. He was a parasite in an expensive suit. I had no choice but to check into a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and old carpet. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding my 2-day-old infant, wondering how my life had collapsed so fast. I looked at my bank account on my phone. The numbers were high. I was a wealthy woman by any standard. But as I looked at the peeling wallpaper, I felt completely bankrupt. My heart was a hollow shell. I realized I couldn't just sit here and cry. I needed a professional to help me handle this mess. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Hello, Mr. Henderson?" I said when my lawyer picked up. "It is Maureen. It is time to show them the deed. I want them out of my house. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I started spying on Brooke's social media. I watched her latest stories with a mixture of rage and disgust. She had already moved all her equipment into the nursery I had spent months decorating. She turned my daughter's room into a content studio for her failing influencer career. She was posing in front of a ring light, wearing one of my silk robes that she must have stolen from my closet. She laughed into the camera, telling her few followers that she was finally living her best life in her family's grand estate. "Hard work pays off," she captioned a photo of her drinking champagne in my kitchen. She was celebrating the fact that she had thrown a mother and a newborn into the street. She had no idea what was coming. The next afternoon, Mark showed up at the motel door. I thought he was there to apologize, but he didn't even ask to hold the baby. He handed me a small bag filled with rags and stained shirts, claiming it was the only clothes Brooke had saved for me. He sat down and sighed, acting like he was the victim of a difficult situation. He pulled a legal document out of his pocket and asked me to sign it. He claimed it was for the homeowner's insurance, saying we needed to update the record since the baby was born. I looked at the fine print at the bottom of the page. It wasn't insurance at all. It was a quitclaim deed. He was trying to trick me into transferring the entire house into his name while I was exhausted. I felt a surge of cold fury, but I didn't let it show on my face. I looked at Mark and pretended to be confused and vulnerable. I told him I was so tired and that maybe he was right about everything. I lured him into staying the night by telling him I missed his company. I used the lingering physical attraction and my acting skills to make him feel like he was back in control of the relationship. I even made him a cup of tea. While he finally fell into a deep sleep, I reached into his pocket and grabbed his phone. I used a software tool I had designed myself to clone his device. Within minutes, I had access to every secret he owned, including this siblings-only group chat. Subscribe for the truth behind their plan. The messages in the group chat were more vile than I could have imagined. I scrolled through months of conversations between Mark and Brooke. They had been planning my eviction since the day I announced my pregnancy. Brooke called me an old ATM, and Mark laughed at her jokes. They discussed how to wait until I was at my weakest, in the hospital, to purge the house of my clutter. They didn't want the extra mouth to feed or the responsibility of a child, they just wanted the luxury of the estate. Brooke's last message sent a chill down my spine. She told Mark that once I signed the deed, they should report me for child neglect because I was homeless and unstable. They weren't just stealing my house, they were planning to take my daughter away to finish me off forever. I didn't cry. My tears had dried up and turned into ice. The next morning, I arranged a meeting with a man named Leo in a quiet corner of a park. Leo was a high-stakes real estate flipper, known for his ruthless tactics. He was also Brooke's biggest investor. I had discovered through Mark's phone that Brooke owed Leo over $50,000 for her failed business ventures, and he was losing his patience. I sat across from him and didn't waste time. I offered to buy Brooke's debt in full, plus a significant bonus for his cooperation. Leo's eyes lit up as I transferred the funds right there from my tablet. By the time I stood up to leave, I didn't just own the house. I literally owned Brooke's financial life. I held her future in my palm. Later that afternoon, I sat in the motel room and opened my laptop. I saw that Brooke was doing a room tour live stream on Instagram. She was walking through the nursery, mocking my cheap, old-fashioned taste to thousands of viewers. She pointed at the spots on the floor where my mother's paintings used to sit, calling them dusty trash. She was basking in the attention of strangers, pretending to be a self-made mogul. My heart hammered in my chest as I created an anonymous account. Thousands of people were watching her lie. I waited for the perfect moment when she was bragging about her family inheritance. I typed a single comment that made the chat go silent. "Check your mail, Brooke. The real landlord is coming for what is hers." The next day, my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, didn't send a letter to Mark. That would have been too simple. Instead, he sent a formal, gold embossed notice to the occupant of my address. It was an invitation to an exclusive homeowners association meeting held at a luxury hotel downtown. To make sure they showed up, the invitation promised a major cash payout for the residents of our specific street due to a recent land use settlement. I knew Brooke's greed would be her undoing. She was desperate for cash to fund her fake lifestyle, and Mark was always looking for a way to pay off his bookies. They fell for the bait instantly. They even posted a photo of the invitation on social media, bragging about their lucky day and upcoming riches. On the morning of the meeting, Brooke and Mark showed up at the hotel looking like royalty. They were dressed in expensive new clothes they had bought using my secondary credit card. I hadn't canceled it yet because I wanted to use the GPS data to track their every move. They strutted into the conference room with their heads held high, clearly expecting to walk out with a massive check. They didn't notice the security guards at the door or the lack of other neighbors. They walked to the front of the room, looking for their names on the velvet chairs. Instead, they found me. I was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, wearing my best black suit. I looked them both dead in the eye. Mark sneered at me the moment he recovered from the shock. He gripped the back of a chair and asked what a homeless woman like me was doing at a private owners meeting. He looked at the lawyers in the room and laughed, telling them I was just his unstable wife who had lost her mind after the baby. Brooke joined in, crossing her arms and smirking. She told the room that I was trespassing and that they should call security to have me removed immediately. She was still wearing my favorite diamond earrings, the ones my father gave me before he passed. They both stood there, radiating a false sense of power, thinking they were about to be handed a fortune. I didn't say a word. I just tossed a thick, blue folder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. I watched the blood drain from Mark's face as he opened the folder. Inside were the trust documents and the original deed to the house. I explained to the room that the house had never belonged to their grandfather. It was a property I had purchased from a complete stranger back in 2021 with my own hard-earned money. I showed them the bank transfers and the tax records that proved I was the sole owner. Brooke started to laugh nervously, shaking her head. She turned to Mark and demanded that he tell everyone I was lying. She screamed that the house was their family legacy. But Mark couldn't speak. He looked like he was going to vomit right there on the expensive hotel carpet. The reality of their situation was finally starting to sink in. Mark finally found his voice, but it was weak and cracking. He admitted to Brooke that he knew the house was in my name, but he claimed he thought he could strong-arm me into sharing the title eventually. The moment the words left his mouth, Brooke turned on him like a wild animal. She screamed that he was a coward and a liar, and then she slapped him across the face with all her strength. The lawyers and security guards watched in silence as the loyal siblings tore each other apart. Brooke cried that she had spent her entire life savings on that content studio and the new furniture. She had gambled everything on a lie that Mark had helped her believe. Their perfect partnership was dead, destroyed by the very greed that had brought them together. I stood up and leaned over the table, looking Brooke directly in the eyes. I told them both that they had a very simple choice to make. They could go back to the house, pack their bags, and be gone by midnight, or I would call the police. I would file charges for trespassing, grand theft, and the destruction of my property, starting with the items they threw in the trash. Brooke tried to play the victim, screaming that I couldn't do this to a mother. I didn't flinch. I told her that I was the only mother in the room, and she was the one who threw my newborn daughter's bed into a rainstorm. I gave them exactly 12 hours to disappear from my sight. The meeting was over, and their time was officially up. At exactly 11:59 p.m., I arrived at my house. I wasn't alone. I had a professional locksmith, a private security team, and my lawyer by my side. I found Mark sitting on the front stairs, weeping into his hands like a broken child. The house was dark, but I could hear Brooke screaming from inside. She had locked herself in the studio and was refusing to leave. She claimed it was her legal place of business. Just as the locksmith reached for the door, 2 police cars pulled into the driveway with their lights flashing. Brooke poked her head out the window, shouting that she was being harassed. But the officers didn't look at me. They walked straight toward the porch. They weren't there for the eviction. They were there for Brooke's unpaid debts. Leo walked up the driveway right behind the police officers, a cold smile on his face. He looked at Brooke through the window and held up a stack of legal papers. "Brooke, you defaulted on your loan 3 days ago," he shouted over her screaming. "I am here with the authorities to seize every piece of equipment in that room to cover your debts." Brooke's face turned white as the officers entered the house. She realized her expensive cameras, lights, and computers, the only things she had left, were about to be taken away. She turned to me, begging for help. I just stood there with my arms crossed. "Actually, Leo," I said calmly, "I bought that debt from you yesterday. The equipment stays right here. It belongs to me now." Her jaw dropped as the reality of her total loss finally hit her. The police escorted a sobbing Brooke out of the house while the locksmith finished changing the deadbolts. I finally walked through my front door, but the air felt heavy and wrong. I headed straight for the nursery. It was a nightmare of neon pink paint and cheap gold tinsel that Brooke had used for her videos. The room where my daughter was supposed to sleep had been desecrated for the sake of likes and clout. I looked in the corner and saw my mother's paintings. They were scratched and damp, piled up like garbage. My heart burned with a fresh, hot rage. As I started to pull down the tacky decorations, I noticed a loose floorboard near the closet. I pried it up and found a small, leather-bound book. It was Brooke's secret diary. I sat on the floor of the ruined nursery and read every word. The diary revealed that Brooke was far more dangerous than just a failed influencer. She had been systematically stealing Mark's gambling money for months, funneling it into her own offshore accounts. She wasn't trying to help her brother, she was planning to kick him out of the house the moment he successfully tricked me into signing the deed. She hated him almost as much as she hated me. I realized then that Mark was just as much a victim of Brooke's manipulation as I had been. However, my pity for him was short-lived. He was still a traitor who had chosen his sister's greed over his own wife and child. They were both snakes, and they deserved to burn together. I spent the next few days in a daze of productivity. I moved back into my home, but it didn't feel like a home yet. It felt like a fortress. I hired a 24/7 armed guard to stand at the gate and installed the most advanced security cameras money could buy. I began the process of the erasure, throwing out everything they had touched. One morning, a delivery truck arrived with a massive bouquet of my favorite lilies. There was a card from Mark filled with apologies and pleas for a second chance. My guard checked the vase before bringing it inside. Taped to the very bottom, hidden by the water and stems, was a tiny, high-tech bugging device. Mark wasn't sorry, he was still trying to find a way to win. I stared at the bugging device and felt a wicked smile spread across my face. He thought he was being clever, but he had just handed me the keys to his final destruction. The revenge arc was officially starting, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Instead of destroying the bug, I placed the vase in my home office where I knew the microphone would pick up every word. I called my lawyer and began leaking fake information. I talked loudly about a secret offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands that held $5 million in untaxed inheritance. I made sure to mention that the access codes were hidden at a specific location. If you want to see the trap snap shut, hit subscribe for the next part. I watched the GPS tracker on Mark's car with bated breath. As I suspected, he had shared my secret with Brooke immediately. The lure of $5 million was a siren song they couldn't resist. The location I had mentioned over the bug was a remote, swampy construction site on the outskirts of the county. I had recently purchased the land because it was prone to flooding and virtually worthless. As a massive storm rolled in, their car sped toward the trap. I logged into the site's perimeter cameras and watched through the rain. Their sleek sedan hit the deep, unpaved muck and screeched to a halt. The more Mark spun the tires, the deeper the car sank into the black slime. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. "How is the inheritance hunt going, guys?" I asked. The silence on the other end was delicious. While they were stranded in the mud, shivering in the dark, I sat comfortably in my warm kitchen and went to work. With a few clicks, I permanently canceled every credit card and froze the joint bank accounts they had been draining. I sent a final email to my legal team to file for a legal separation. I made sure to include an at-fault clause for extreme financial abuse and domestic abandonment. My phone pinged with a notification from a social media monitoring tool. Brooke's verified Instagram account, her only source of pride, had been deleted. My tech team had successfully reported her for years of fraudulent activity and buying fake followers. She was losing her voice and her money at the exact same time. The influencer was officially silenced. I wasn't done with Brooke's reputation yet. I took the high-definition security footage from the day I was in labor and edited it into a short, powerful video. It showed her heartlessly throwing the baby's crib into the mud while laughing. I titled it, "The Real Face of Brooke's Family Estate Lifestyle." I uploaded it to every major platform and watched the view count explode. By midnight, it had gone viral. People were horrified by her cruelty. I watched in real time as her remaining sponsors sent public messages cutting all ties with her. One clothing brand even demanded she return the samples she had stolen. She had wanted to be famous, and now she was, but as the most hated woman on the internet. Her digital life was a pile of ashes. The next blow was a silent one, but it was the most lethal. I gathered all the digital records from Brooke's secret diary and her messy financial spreadsheets. I packaged them neatly and sent an anonymous digital tip to the IRS. I included proof that she hadn't paid a single cent in taxes on her influencer earnings or her private investments for over 5 years. I knew the government moved slowly, but they were relentless. Within hours of the tip being processed, a formal lien notice was generated and placed on her car, her only asset in the world. She was now a woman with nothing and a long list of federal questions to answer. Finally, I turned my sights back to Mark. He still held a mid-level position at my software firm, a job I had helped him get as a favor. I didn't just fire him, I wanted him to see the mirror of his own betrayal. I sent a company-wide memo to every employee, from the interns to the board members. Attached to the email were the siblings-only chat logs where he joked about stealing from the company and mocking our clients. The office was in an uproar within minutes. I stood by the window and watched as 2 security guards escorted Mark out of the building. He carried a small cardboard box, his golden boy reputation shattered forever. He was officially a pariah in the industry I helped him build. Mark and Brooke were drowning in their own choices, but I needed one more nail in the coffin. I filed a massive civil lawsuit against Brooke for the intentional destruction of my property. I didn't just ask for the cost of the items she threw away, I sued her for the exact replacement value of everything, totaling $85,000. This included the emotional and sentimental value of my mother's heirloom art, which was priceless to me but now a heavy debt for her. Since Brooke had no cash and no house, the court moved quickly. A judge ordered a sheriff's sale of all her personal luxury items to satisfy the judgment. Her expensive jewelry, her designer bags, and even her high-end shoes were listed for public auction. She was about to be stripped of every status symbol she had ever used to look down on me. The day of the auction arrived, and I made sure to be there in the front row. I wore a sharp white suit that looked like armor. Brooke sat in the back of the room, looking haggard and broken without her makeup and hair extensions. She watched with tears in her eyes as the auctioneer held up her favorite designer bags. I didn't let anyone else win. I outbid every person in the room, buying back everything Brooke ever loved for pennies on the dollar. I bought her favorite diamond necklace and her limited edition heels. When the final gavel fell, I walked past her and didn't say a word. Later that night, I took a high-quality photo of myself wearing her favorite necklace while holding my daughter. I sent it to her phone with no caption. It was the ultimate silent victory. Brooke had been squatting in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment in a rundown part of the city. She thought she was safe there, hidden away from the world's judgment. She didn't realize that I was watching her every move through the public records. When the building came up for sale, I didn't hesitate. I used a shell company to buy the entire apartment complex. I became her landlord without her even knowing it. On a cold Monday morning, I drove to the building myself. I walked down the dim, narrow hallway that smelled of old cooking grease and trash. I reached her door and used a piece of heavy-duty tape to attach a formal 3-day pay-or-quit notice. I stood there for a moment, listening to her crying on the other side of the thin wood. The cycle was complete. Late that night, my security alarm began to blare. I checked my phone and saw Brooke on the cameras. She was fueled by a dangerous mix of rage and cheap wine. She had broken into the house through a basement window, carrying a heavy canister of gasoline. She stumbled toward the studio she had built, screaming that if she couldn't have the house, nobody could. She tried to strike a match to set the room on fire, her face twisted in a mask of pure insanity. I didn't run down to fight her or scream. I stood at the top of the stairs and calmly watched the monitor. I picked up my phone and called the police, then spoke into the house intercom. "I'm recording everything, Brooke. That is arson. That is a first-degree felony." She froze, the match burning her fingers. A week later, I visited Brooke in the county jail. She looked unrecognizable in her orange jumpsuit. Her skin was sallow, and her ego had finally been crushed into dust. She sat behind the thick glass partition, staring at me with hollow, defeated eyes. I picked up the phone and told her I was willing to offer her a plea deal. I told her I would speak to the district attorney about a lighter sentence for the arson attempt, but it came with a very high price. "I want the truth about Mark's accidents over the last year," I said firmly. Brooke didn't even hesitate to betray him. She began to talk, her voice shaking as she confessed to everything they had done behind my back. She was ready to throw Mark under the bus to save herself from 10 years in prison. Brooke's confession was a flood of secrets that made my skin crawl. She admitted that the break-in we had a year ago was entirely staged by Mark. He hadn't lost my grandmother's jewelry to a thief. He had taken it himself to pay off a high-stakes gambling debt. He had even broken a window and bruised his own ribs to make the story look real. Brooke had helped him hide the items and sell them to a shady dealer downtown. As she spoke into the jailhouse phone, the recording device captured every word of their conspiracy. I watched her lips move, feeling a strange sense of relief. It wasn't just my imagination. I hadn't been a difficult wife. I had been a target. I handed the digital file of her confession to the district attorney before I even left the building. The police caught up with Mark at a flashy hotel bar downtown. He was dressed in one of the suits I had bought him, trying to pick up a younger woman by telling her he owned a major software firm. He was mid-sentence, laughing and flashing a fake smile, when the officers approached him from behind. I stood across the street, tucked into the shadows, holding my baby daughter close to my chest. I wanted to see the exact moment his world collapsed. Mark's face went from confusion to pure terror as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He looked around wildly, hoping for a way out, but there was nowhere to run. He saw me standing there, watching him get shoved into the back of a squad car. He shouted my name, but I simply turned my back and walked away. With the traitors gone, I focused on healing. I hired a professional restoration team to work on my mother's paintings. They spent weeks carefully cleaning the mud and repairing the tears in the canvas. They told me the paintings could never be perfect again, as the water had left permanent marks on the fabric. I looked at the faint lines and the slight fades in the color and realized I didn't mind. The scars on the canvas made the art more valuable to me now. They represented the fact that we had survived the storm. A few days later, I received a heavy envelope in the mail. It was a letter from Mark's parents. They expressed their deep shame and told me they were officially disowning both of their children. They apologized for the monsters they had raised and asked for my forgiveness. I decided to complete the erasure by transforming the house. I tore out the neon lights and the tacky wallpaper from Brooke's studio and turned the space into a massive, sunlit playroom for my daughter. I repainted the walls a soft, calming white and filled the room with books and wooden toys. I officially changed the name of the property in the local registry to the Fortress. It was no longer just a building, it was a statement of my strength and my daughter's future. While cleaning out a deep vent in the hallway, I found one last piece of the past. It was a small, handwritten note Brooke had tucked away before she was arrested. It read, "You won, Maureen, but look at you. You are completely alone." I stared at the paper for a long moment before dropping it into the fireplace. I looked at my reflection in the glass and saw a woman who had fought for her dignity and won. The trash had been taken out, and the house had never been cleaner. The war was over, and I had survived. Thank you. Please like, share and subscribe for more. Also turn on your notification bell so you be the first to get our next shocking revenge story.